right, everyone. Carm Grasso here with Todd Sardella and Danymal. And we're talking about the making of the Grasso Sardella album. And I thought we'd have a discussion today about it. You know, this album started out just in conversation, Todd, back in 2016. Isn't that right?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about making some music together, having a couple tunes, and I think it was 2 or 3 songs. Now, in the past, we've recorded stuff together, written stuff together, and we'll maybe address that a little bit later. But the idea here is we hadn't really done much musically. We've jammed together, of course, in those years, but since about 1997. So it seemed like the stars aligned for us to even start having the conversations about doing some more original music together.
Yeah, that's what it was. And if I recall correctly, I think one of the things that we talked about was there were a couple of acoustic riffs or things that were left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, back in 97 or 98 that we could even use as a little springboard to maybe put some new stuff together. And then I know you had some stuff that you thought may be more suited to this style of recording that you wanted to get.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some good ideas that we never finished off, and I felt unsettled about that all those years. So when we finally had the opportunity to get together and start talking about it, I don't think it was until almost 2019 where we said, now's the time we're going to actually do this. For a handful of years, we talked about it. And I think it was November 2019, you stopped here in Mellow Sound Studios, and we had a conversation about some of the tunes that I had. But it was very short kind of conversation, right? I said, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And you were pretty happy with what you heard, right?
I remember being pretty happy with what I heard. Yes. I think that was memorialized in a photo where we were both holding guitars and
that's right.
And kind of going over some ideas and thinking about things and telling stories and kind of maybe setting the scenario or the mood with stories from the 80s and 90s and putting us back into that mindset. And then, yeah, you were playing for me at the time. A lot of the ideas that you had, some of them were completed ideas. As if I recall correctly, you had some of these songs that wound up being part of this project were essentially completed musical landscapes at that point.
Yeah. So what I'd been doing since 2010, and then with Danny, who has joined us today, since about 2017, is release a whole bunch of instrumental shred guitar albums, right? And yep. I try to make those like more songs than they are like just shred fest, although I do love that kind of thing. So when I knew we were going to work together, I thought, let me actually use some of this material that I think you had said to me in the past after listening to one of my albums, Mixed Signals. You said, I could hear some melodies that I could sing over this. And I thought, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we do proper songs? And I'm going to use some of this material. Now, some of it was just in my head for many years. So I believe it was November 2019 when I started to record all the guitar parts, and I did all the electric guitars. I used some acoustic sounds, some synth sounds, pianos, all that stuff. But after 2 or 3 songs, I was kind of on a roll, and I said, well, Todd and I only talked about 2 or 3 songs, but hey, why not take a gamble here? And I said, let me do them. And I came up with 10. I was done recording all the guitar parts. I think it was January 3rd, 2020. And so I was ready at that point with a bunch of tunes. Danny, were you surprised that I said it was going to be 2 or 3 songs, but I always over deliver?
Oh yeah, totally. And then as I can attest to both of you, as far as your musical prowess, one day you're like, hey Todd, do vocals on this, would you? Yeah, I'll get around to it. And then like 72 hours later, you have like the song is done. You're like, when did you do this?
Well, you know, that's kind of
and same thing for you with guitars and all that. You're like, I started writing the song and here's the final product 12 hours later.
Yeah, well, we like to have a lot of fun with it, but when we get down to business, I think the ideas just start flowing. Now, the way that we've partnered in the past, usually I would write the music and then I would say, I have this idea, Todd, here you go, and check, put some lyrics to it, put some melodies. This time it was a little bit different in the sense that we had a big event, which I won't say here on the video because I don't want the bots coming after us, but we had a big event in 2020, which allowed us to spend a whole lot of time in our studios. And once I recorded the music, I thought, why not take a stab, which was a big endeavor for me, take a stab at writing lyrics, some melodies. And, you know, in most cases, I gave Todd a musical blueprint in a sense, but I knew that once he got it in his hands, he was going to add some magic. And Todd, what did you say? I think you used something where you said, Carm, you brewed the coffee and you added the sugar and cream. Is that right?
That's what it was. That's what it was. Yeah. Yeah. In the past, as you said, you would just present me with an instrumental idea, an instrumental track, and then I would take it upon myself to create a melody, write all the lyrics, and then create the harmonies and the vocal arrangements around it. Whereas this time around, when you wrote the songs, and it was probably true back then too, but this time around, when you wrote the songs, you had a melody in mind, subject matter for the lyrics. In some cases, the lyrics that we used were completely yours. So this time around, yeah, that's what I said. It was like you brewed the coffee, and then it was just time for me to take it and add some cream and sugar to it, and add some flavoring, and just make it that much better. But primarily, it was your basis. So I'd say in the past, maybe the best way to put it is in the past, they were 50-50 propositions. And right now it's more like 70-30.
Yeah. Well, what I knew though, the reason why I was really excited about this is having worked with you in the past, Todd, you know, and I worked with other folks in the meantime. We both did, right? Doing our separate paths and that kind of thing. But I knew once you were able to get started recording, which I think might have been about sometime in March 2020 or something along those lines. I mean, right away, I knew even before it was going to be good. And for those of you who haven't heard the album yet or are about to hear it, I call Todd's vocal style high flying. And, you know, our aim with all of these songs was to have big guitars, big choruses, big hooks. And your vocal style is a key element of that presentation, in my opinion. Danny, you have any thoughts or?
Yeah, I was just going to jokingly say Def Leppard Part 2.
Okay. Yeah. Some French.
Because that name was thrown around a lot in the beginning, but we ended up not sticking to that drum sound per se. So, right. But vocally, yes, tons of stacks and whatnot. And it just, you know, between you guys on guitars and vocals, it's just like, I don't even know. It's almost like a choral kind of quality, but like with that 70s rock vibe, but with modern production techniques, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we laid down the roots or had the seeds of that back when we started. Todd, what was it, 1987, where our musical partnership and chemistry started? And we've been recording all along. How many projects did we do? We went to studios, we did home recording, a ton of stuff, right?
Yeah, we did a lot of home recording on I still have it downstairs somewhere, an old cassette 4-track Vestifier multi-track recorder. Which was analog. You could only record on 2 tracks at once. So what we did was we had a drummer we were playing with for a long time, who I would do submix like 3 drum mics, and it was terrible engineering because I didn't know what I was doing, but just set up 3 drum mics and like submix those into 1 track on the 4-track, and then took and then I mixed my bass into it too. I played bass guitar. And then on the 2nd track, we just mic'd up your amp, and we did a bunch of rhythm tracks, and then that left 2 tracks for vocals. So I did some bouncing or did some 2-track harmonies and things, but primitive. But that was the beginning, and those were the hooks, and that was your initial foray into writing those kind of riffs, which you still continue to write now. They're just a lot more sophisticated than they were in 1988.
Yeah. What was that song called? Was that Shotgun? That was the first one. I remember it's one of the first ones we did. We'll leave that in the past, but it was a good song and a good springboard for us to get started. And then I know that we did some acoustic sessions real late, like I said, I think before, what was it, 96, 97, that were unfinished. So in between that time, there was a ton of music. But interestingly, all the songs that we have, I think save one, for the Grasso Sardella release were new. We had not recorded those before.
That's right.
Okay, perfect. Now, you were going to talk a little bit, Todd. I kind of jumped in here about, your approach to vocals, and, what's your thought on that? Because I remember in the beginning when I said, here it is. It's March 2020, so I'm going to get started. When you delivered the first song, which we'll talk about later, I think it was Undertow, I was blown away. But you took a very particular approach to it and a style that is, I think, very identifiable. And yeah, we were shooting for the big vocals, but you've got your own thing going on with the vocals. We want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I've always been interested in stacked vocals because I've always heard harmonies. I've heard complex harmonies in my head. So going back to Brian Wilson in the Beach Boys, and then going up through things like Roy Thomas Baker, the producer of the Cars and Queen, who had a unique 48-track machine that, and he used to layer the vocals with the Cars and have like 72 tracks of vocals on those recordings. And Mutt Lange, as you stated, Def Leppard, but also when Mutt Lange recorded the Cars with the Heartbeat City album. Stacked vocals have always been interesting to me, whereas there's less emotion in a lead vocal. There's almost no such thing as a lead vocal almost in this whole new project. It's almost,
I remember that as a mix note.
Yeah, many tries, Danny, before you got the chemistry right on the mix, right? But
all you had to say was Alice in Chains from the word go, and I'm like, oh, gotcha.
Yeah, because when someone is going to look at what I do haphazardly in the way I record it, there's no such thing as a lead vocal and then a backing vocal bus or something, like no such thing. It's like a blanket of vocals. So that's the way I saw it. I didn't try to put emotion into any one particular track. Instead, what I would do is hear the chords and the harmonies and perhaps do 2 or 3. I'm not into this digital copying and messing with it. I like to do analog, even though it's on digital equipment, do analog doubling and tripling of a part and then move on to the next part and then the next part. So on some of these songs, there's anywhere from 12 to 18 tracks of vocals. And
I remember.
So to me, that provided the thickness and the depth of some of the sounds that were going on. And I very rarely branched off into some type of emotional solo vocal. I can only think of maybe 4 or 5 spots on the whole album where that takes place. So that was my approach. It was my approach back 20, 30 years ago, but I didn't have the tracks to be able to do it. I remember the recording we did in 1994, 1995. That was, what was that at St. Rose Studios, I think it was, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That was my first.
That was 16 tracks.
That was my first introduction. Was 16 track, 2-inch analog, where I actually had the treat of having like 6 or 7 tracks for vocals in some places. And so that was the first time I had the ability to do that. But if you listen to that back right now, I wish we had that 2-inch tape that we could work with again and fix it up.
What they want, $750 for the tape, and we were tapped out already on budget.
Something like that. So all we got was the glass master and the CD of that, which, quite frankly, the sound quality is not the greatest. But nevertheless, even going back then, I liked the idea of double and triple and quadruple tracking parts. And so that's what I brought here. And in the first vocal track that I actually did was November of 19 is when I worked with Door to Nowhere, because that was the first one. That was the first one because, as you referenced, there was one song that was kind of left over from old ideas. And that one was the most prominent one, which actually had vocals and lyrics and everything in place. So we almost just reproduced that one, but with a new sound. And that was and then Undertow was the second one that I did. And you're right, it was March of 2020. And I was probably a little lax in taking maybe a few weeks in between. And then I'd get a little inspiration, put the headphones on, crank up the gear. And within about 3 hours, I'd have something and I'd do a demo mix and send it over to you and say, what do you think? So that was always my idea, was to just stack the vocals. As soon as I got a inspiration, then I would do it.
Well, that's what you want. And that's the beauty actually of the whole home studio, right? I mean, a lot of folks, some notable artists who were used to getting together in the studio to bounce ideas off of each other. That was the norm for them when we all had that event in 2020 and for a couple of years where we couldn't get together. That changed the way people work. But for us, this was, I've been recording remote albums with folks over in the UK and Singapore for a number of years, and Danny's been helping me with that. So we did all of this in our own home studios. And I don't know, Todd, do you have a name for your studio? I've called my Mellow Sound Studios. I've recorded a lot of albums in here, thousands of hours of recording. But yours was right in your studio as well, in your home, right?
Yeah, my studio, excuse me, was my desktop computer in my family room.
There you go.
Which
desktop studios.
As soon as I got out the mic stand and the headphones and cranked up the Studio One software, then it became my studios. And that was it. I mean, it's kind of like behind the scenes how the sausage is made, but I was sitting in my computer chair or standing up with the headphones on, similar to how Danny looks right now, and just laying down tracks one after another.
I love that. I love that because you have the advantage as opposed to being in the old day, so to speak, old day, when we go in the studio and the clock's running. You can do as many takes as you want, work whenever you'd like, and wait for inspiration to strike as opposed to doing it on command. So I do remember the first time where you sent over Undertow. It was the weather was kind of nice. I was outside. I put it on my headphones and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And what I really remember, we'll talk more about that song later, but what I remember is just how that musical interplay, right? That where you played off some of my melodies and so forth. So that was cool. Now, you did that all in your living room or your family room with Studio One. I used Logic and I've got my little studio here. It's been thousands of hours of recording. And, you talked about your vocal style, and I'll ask for Danny to interject here because he's been working with me for a number of years now. But the way that I approach at least the guitar parts is, back in the day, I learned real early, going back to that St. Rose session, for example, power chords, they're cool. But if you want to do anything with some tonality, major, minor, some colorings, a lot of distortion, it gets really mushy and things start to happen. And so what I've developed over the years is this style where I do multi-tracks of guitars, but I'm always experimenting with different voicings, different chord inversions, different colorings to try to make things a little bit more interesting. And I think that's become kind of like my signature sound, at least rhythm-wise. Danny, you have any comments on that? I know we've talked about this before.
To reiterate what I've said in the past over your solo stuff, which is similar to this, I have yet to hear a rock instrumental soloist who sounds anything like you do, because most of them that I've heard, even big names that we both admire, it's always, basically the traditional, let's call it path of, just the rhythm guitar and then like the lead melody, and that's it. And I'm always surprised. I'm like, for who you are, I think that you would kind of like push the envelope just a little bit. I mean, because like I said before, your stuff sounds like orchestral guitars, for the lack of a better term. There's like all this color, and when you solo your tracks, you're like, oh, the power chords on this track, and then he's, countering it or complementing it rather on the, another track, like with like the inversion or adding the thirds and the other elements and the sevenths and stuff to the chords. So it just builds it up. It's almost like Todd vocals, but on two hands.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, Danny. And I think that gives this project a very unique sound between that approach to the guitars and the instrumentation to Todd's vocal approach. I feel like we came up with something really special here, and it certainly draws on some influences that we both have, in melodic rock, whether it be 70s, 80s, or even beyond. But I think it melds all of those things together, and it has a lot of personality. I think the rhythms are muscular, and they have some different color, and Todd's vocals take it over the top. In terms of using players, is Todd and I had that foundation. I came up with the music, lyrics, and some blueprints for Todd to work with. Danny, you help with the pre-production, getting some drum sounds in there, getting some bass lines put in there. once we had all of these things ready to go, worked with a couple session players that I've used since 2017 and worked with on Mixed Signals, As If by Magic, and Siren. Chris Allen from the UK, he's a monster drummer, and I know Danny makes many of his drums, as well as Dan Hawkins, and he's actually from the UK as well, but now lives in Singapore. And I figured I had this powerful rhythm section that I've used. They know my music, I know their style. We've complemented each other very well, so why not use them for the Grasso Sardella project? And guys, any thoughts on those performances? I know I have some thoughts, but I don't want to do all the talking. Danny, Todd, what do you think about Chris and Dan and what they contributed to the album?
I mean, they definitely have honed their craft over the years. I mean, and ironically, I don't think that either of them have ever met each other. So it's just one of those testaments, going back to the whole internet thing and remote recording. I mean, they play very, very well together. They haven't probably jammed in the same.
I've never met them either, right?
Right. They don't know each other and, so forth. But they're very tastefully done. Certain songs, like when I've programmed the drums, I try to, keep it basic and loose, but sometimes, depending on what you're playing on guitar, that'll lend itself to, inspiration for certain types of fills rhythmically. You try to get a little bit creative with the bass stuff, but not, too wacky. But Hawkins, he definitely has a knack for taking what you've done and then kind of interjecting his, his actual, because I'm not a bassist by any stretch. I can play one, but what people, or actually they'll never hear it unless you use some sort of rare, rare track release. But, I just punching the notes in manually as far as performance goes. And I'm just using a Easy Bass from Tune Track is the source of that. And then that's basically just a blueprint for them to run with. Yeah. Yeah. And they do it extremely well. I mean, they're both full-time session players, so they kind of have a workflow of their own, but they complement your particular style really well.
Yeah, and I think that was born out of doing 3 albums together. With them, and it's kind of cool. I've not met them, but I feel like we have a lot of similar musical interests, and Chris Allen and I are in touch sometimes. About new things that we're checking out. We like a lot of the same music.
I'll go back to something Danny was saying at first. The demos that we used. Perhaps in 10 years when we release the deluxe version of this, with, demos, maybe your vocal blueprint tracks.
Nobody needs to hear those.
Maybe Fort Knox.
Those are in Fort Knox. I mean, they were done for demonstration purposes only.
I've got copies, so we'll set up an extortion in a while, but. I think that the demos are very close to the finished product, and what both of them did, both Chris and Dan, was they took the ideas the way that they were on the demos, but then gave it enough of their own flavor to make it sound like live playing, which it was, and not just copy the demos exactly, but copy the feel of the demos. There are a couple of places, I'm thinking of one spot in Undertow in the outro when Dan just played this really melodic little bass thing over the course of a measure, that by itself, like I heard it and I'm going, yes,
right.
Because those little things are why you have live players and why you have people that have that kind of talent. They interjected just enough of their respective personalities into the recordings without overtaking them or trying to be the star.
Yeah, very, very tasteful stuff. And I agree that they both performed real well. And Dan has some very tasty bass lines throughout the album and throughout all the projects that he's worked on for me as well, instrumentally. So with the opener of the album is Undertow. And I'll start that this was an idea I had around for a number of years, but not really formally recorded. And I had an idea for, once I hit record and I started building out the song, especially the chorus, I had a melody in my mind. And for some reason, just something came to me about like an undertow being pulled under, fighting against the tide and so forth. And from a standpoint of this song, and really most of the songs, really, I think these are like experiential or they're situational, right? Something that everybody can identify with. And I handed that over to Todd. Todd, in the way of undertow, I gave you some ideas with the melody, and I had a pretty solid chorus in terms of lyrics, but you took it to the next level. And my favorite part of that song, probably, I'm just going to say, is the bridge into the outro. But I'll let you, what do you remember about that tune?
Yeah. Well, I do remember that actually one of the primary movers in that, the guitar intro before the verse comes in came from an acoustic idea you had back in the late 90s. So that was the guitar riff there, if you call it a riff or a little melody or something that you're doing there, came from 20 plus years ago. And then it evolved into this. I remember getting your vocal blueprint for it and the ideas, and this is one of the classic ideas of the Cream and Sugar. A lot of your lyrics were, admittedly, they were working lyrics. They were pretty primitive. You know, there's only so many times you could say "I love you," "I want you, baby," and stuff like that. I did change some of the words around, but still kept the complete idea that you had. Like, for example, I remember specifically in the chorus, you said, "I'm begging for my life," and I changed it to "as I beg for my life." So there were little changes like that I made that seemed to rhythmically fit a little better or something like that. And I think what I did was I just took that melody that you had, and then I remember stacking it up, excuse me here, and then doing the backgrounds behind it, which were all just based upon the guitar melodies that were going on. So it was a back and forth, so I guess that's how I remember it. I wasn't that invested in the lyrics so much, but I know what you mean about probably the greatest part of that song is when I took your simple idea for that outro of the bridge into the final chorus. And then it built with that drum and bass kick with the guitar over the kind of like stutter step vocal there, and that became the emotional high point of the song, which is pretty rare. Usually it's a chorus or something like that, but I think that part was.
Yeah.
So and I think overall, I thought that one had the best potential of being. I mean, they're all hooky. All 10 songs have hooks. And that's something I think going back to the 90s, we always had. Right? People would say that to us. Right. Going back then, our high school and college friends would listen to our stuff. I can't get that song out of my head or something like that, you know? And that was true going back to then, which is the mark of a great songwriter, right? We had earworms going on with people, and they would just sing our songs back to us or say, I can't get it out of my head, and they'd actually be pissed. You know, that the song would be stuck in their head. And to me, all 10 of these were hooky, but I think that undertow, the whole landscape of the melody and the harmonies and the hook, I think became my favorite one.
Excellent. Yeah. And we'll talk more about it later. That'll be the first single and also video to go along with that. So that's undertow. Let's talk a little bit about All You Got. Now, you know, someone, the photographer and person that we're working with on video, Rick Scheel, said to me, you know, Carm, you know, the whole album's got a certain vibe, but All You Got is like an outlier in the sense that it's really kind of like uplifting and positive song. And I guess I was in a good mood that day, right? Whereas on something like Undertow is you know, it has potentially a down vibe to it in the sense that it's like a challenging thing. All You Got was really kind of a tune where it's uplifting. You can do this. Give it everything you got, as the lyrics say. And in that song especially, I really made a concerted effort, musically at least, to try to do something that was like in the vein of a Queen or a Def Leppard. Whether or not it came out that way, I'm not sure, but it has some of those, you know, a driving bass line, it has some clean guitars, it has some heavy guitars, and an uplifting vocal. That's what I remember about that one. Todd, any thoughts there? I know that I had a good blueprint on that one, but I think you changed the melody a little bit during the chorus on that one as well, or did some stuff to it. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Yeah, I didn't exactly change the melody, but what I did was I added the counter, like the answering part. To you had the initial melody going through in the chorus, and then I had that answering part where it says "Give it your best shot," which is almost like an answer to "Gotta give it all you got." And I also remember distinctly that you were saying you wanted some type of anthemic type song.
Yeah.
Going back to the old stories about Kiss when they said you have to write an anthem and they wrote Rock and Roll All Night, or you want some lyric like that can be kind of like rallying or something, which, yeah, a lot of these other songs are pretty dark, quite frankly, in terms of attitudes and melodic material. Dark but beautiful.
Right.
I'm the first one to say that dark can be beautiful.
Right.
But in this one, it's also the way that you played the guitar was more of a, I'm not going to say reggae, but it was more of a jangly type of rhythm, jazzy. It's the closest thing to, I remember going back to 1989 or so, we wrote a song called "She's Gone Away."
Oh, right, yeah.
Which was a similar vibe in terms of almost getting rid of the distortion completely and just kind of playing some chunky, jazzy, almost reggae-like rhythms. And so that's in your face right at the beginning of the song. And that really is what drives the song. And then when it gets into those middle bridge parts, then it goes into traditional distortion, but then it goes back to the other sound and the other way of playing. So I think that also is what gives that song its unique personality.
Excellent. One of my favorite tunes on the album for sure, but definitely a little bit different than the others.
Yeah, that tune almost has like, you know, potential as like a ringtone or playing at sports events, you know, sky's the limit. We'll see what happens.
I kind of like that. Yeah, we could do that. That seems like a great thing, as long as we can maybe get paid on it every time they play it in the sports arena. Yeah. I'd be good with that. So let's get on that. All right, so that's all you got. Let's talk a little bit about Cold. Now, Cold, you know, again, I had an idea there for, you know, relationship type of scenario, and the lyrics kind of play out someone who is, you know, maybe mistreating you or is very difficult and so forth. But
the verses in that song are killer.
Yeah, thanks. What I really remember about that tune, when I was talking about the style that I employ on the guitars, that one is very representative of that muscular sound. And dare I say, I'm going to bring up the term, because Todd and I used to call him this before musical theory, before I understood what a 1/6 chord was, or putting a different root in the bass. You know, that one is what it has a lot of what I used to call Dokken chords, right? George Lynch being one of my favorite guitar players, right? But I think there's a heaviness to that song, not only with the guitars, but also just generally speaking. And it's got that sound that I like. I think coming out of the first chorus, going into that verse is one of the heaviest parts of the whole tune. And then in the middle, it's got that kind of like Deep Purple vibe, at least in my mind, in that bridge. So, Todd, what do you remember about that one?
I reiterate a lot of what you're saying there. I remember having the idea of putting all the oohs in the background, so there's a fair amount of backing vocal where I there aren't words that I'm singing a lot of oohs behind there to have it be kind of cold and dark.
Yeah.
And then I also, it's one of the rare spots where I am singing just a unison in a couple of spots in the verses, and that I distinctly remember saying like it's a Dokken type feel. That I was looking for that kind of vocally. That's what that reminded me of, the "As I Reach for You" part. I really thought that was appropriate, and so that's one of the ones that came the quickest.
Okay. Yeah.
I think from the time I sat down to it, and I tweaked some of the lyrics here and there, not too much though, but I did tweak some of the lyrics. From the time I sat down, tweaked the lyrics, and did all the vocal tracks, it probably wasn't more than about 2 hours.
Wow. Yeah. That's great. That's great work for a couple hours.
Well, it just came. So when it happens, that's the way this was. There were there would be like a week or two between songs, and then I get the inspiration, just sit down and spend a couple hours and churn one out. And that's what happened with Cold.
Yeah, great tune. And one of my favorite solos too, one of the things that I like to do on solos, generally speaking, and Todd, you've been listening to this for many, many years, are half step bends. And there's quite a few of them in there during that solo break, which I think is probably one of my favorite on the album. And it's kind of interesting too, and going back to the whole thing of like doing the shred instrumental albums, I think that what I tried to do on all of this, we talked a lot about the rhythms, but when it comes to solo sections and so forth, is really, as cliche as it sounds, is to play for the song and not to go completely overboard. Like if you want to listen to shredding, I've got all those other albums, but I think in this particular song, there was a good opportunity to step on the gas pedal a little bit and do something that was my vibe of totally the half step bend and the George Lynch kind of thing. So one of my favorite solos. Again, I'm biased, but what the heck. Danny, any other comments on Cold?
I just really love the and I, not to toot my own horn, but I think I came up with that that verse groove on drums and all that. It just the way it was I did. Cool.
Yeah, I think when it does.
Chris did a nice job translating that into a live performance. So I just think it has a really cool, like that halftime feel before it goes into, like you said, stepping on the gas in the chorus.
Yeah. When the album is over. And that's one I think I let Todd hear early on, when that day that we talked about where you stopped over to my place. And I said, here's an idea that I have. Again, that was one of the earliest ones that I recorded just for this album, never had been recorded before. And I ran with the lyrics there. It's about something that everybody can identify, and that's dealing with a relationship, for example, that is over and the pain that goes along with that. And I think in this case, while Todd, I gave you some rough vocals and through Logic Pro, I think in this one I may have even given you something that I recorded right on my phone, didn't I? I don't remember if that was how I sent that over, but that was pretty complete, I think, that set of lyrics.
That song Over is the closest thing to your exclusive composition. I didn't change any of the words.
Okay.
Left the words completely as is, left your melodic ideas completely as is, and all I did was build up the vocals around your ideas, and put in some oohs and ahs, and really thickened up some of the answer, the call and answer type of the chorus is like a call and answer kind of thing, and so I thickened up both sides of that with about maybe 4 or 5 vocal parts on each one, and just took your idea and ran with it. But as I said, that was 100% your lyrics. It was 100% your idea, and all I really did was arrange and thicken up the vocals on that, and that's all I did.
Yeah, I like the way that came out. Maybe from a production standpoint, what I was looking for, especially during the verses, that really, and I think Dan Hawkins did a great job with this too, with the bass line, is that really punchy kind of sound that reminded me, going back to like a Def Leppard type of thing, where you had that almost staccato sound that keeps the song pumping along. So great job there. I really like the way that one came out.
I love the outro in that song too, actually.
Oh yeah, you mean the guitar solo part?
Well, that, and then the transition into Todd's call and response sort of thing going on there.
Yeah, interestingly, that solo was probably one of the last things that I added, and then it goes right into Todd's outro portion of it. And admittedly, when there's a song from Natalie Imbruglia, I think it's called Torn, and there's a guitar part in there, and I was like, I must have something like this. And in this case, I used my Schecter SLS guitar with the sustainer on it, and that's why I was able to kind of like pull it off. So it's not actually a slide, but that's one of my favorite parts. And then, of course, going into Todd's outro vocal, and it sounds very emotional, and then ending on that minor chord, I think is pretty cool as well. All right. Let's talk about Consequence. That's the next track on the album. And as the name implies, that is the lyrics there are very heavily about somebody who operates with no concern about others or about the consequences that might come out of their actions. And, you know, again, an experiential type of thing. And we all know someone like this, but I remember this.
They're called politicians.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. But without getting political, I think the idea here is, I mean, when I had this riff that was like very, again, Def Leppard in vein kind of thing, and I was just inspired by that. And I think Todd, when Todd heard this riff, I don't know if you remember, you said it does sound a little bit like a little bit of Leppard, and I thought, okay, fair enough, being a big influence on me, but I think we took it in a really cool direction. And one of the parts, you know, it's a very melodic solo, but one of the parts that I really love there is what you did, Todd, in the bridge, or it's, you know, it's pre-bridge. It's not actually even the bridge, you know, About You. What would we call that? That's like a bridge.
The song doesn't have a traditional song structure, which is part of the reason why I like it so much, but I'll get to that when it's my turn.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Give me your thoughts on this one, because your vocals on this one are extremely impressive, as they are throughout, but something special about this one, I think.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I have this be honorable mention for the second best to Undertow. And in some ways, I think it's even a better accomplishment than Undertow. It's like I said, it's not a traditional song structure. It builds and builds, and you don't hear the chorus until 2 minutes into the song. It's a constant building of idea after idea after idea. And once the idea is done, you don't hear it again.
Right.
Okay, like the initial first verse kind of thing. Once it goes into the next part, it doesn't go back to that first part. Once you get done with the About You answering vocal part that you're talking about, you don't hear that again. And then it goes into the chorus. And then your solo, I think, it's probably my favorite guitar moment on the album, because the solo almost tells a story in itself. Just the solo in and of itself is almost a song unto itself, I'd say. I didn't change too many of your lyrics. I changed a few things here and there just to fit them into the vocal ideas. The other thing that I did was I had a very strong feeling about changing up the drum pattern in a few places, either having the drum drop out and fill back in a couple of spots, to have the drums drop into halftime. In the most emotional part of the chorus, where it says, without regret, no safety net, no consequence, the drums drop into halftime, which makes the words all the more powerful. So I had some distinct ideas about the drum part in this that Chris picked up perfectly and ran with. So I really, sometimes when I was listening to this, I thought this was my favorite one. But I'd say overall, it's probably my second favorite. I just think it's almost like a little pocket symphony, in the sense that it just goes from part to part to part. And then a little nod to Brian Wilson with my ending.
I was going to say.
Yeah, that my ending vocals, that chord that I sing at the end has nothing to do with the rest of the song, but it's just sounded cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one. Danny, any thoughts on this one?
Other than Todd's vocals, I'm having a hard time remembering most of what it sounds like. I know it was awesome because I do remember distinctly thinking Beach Boys like the whole time when I was, working on Todd's vocal edits and tuning and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely up there as far as I'd say top 3 of my faves from the record.
Okay, excellent. So let's move on to the next one. The next song is a ballad called The Other Side. And, I did a lot of work on this one because I wanted to be more light and airy. And I remember using my Kiesel AE 185 a lot for those clean and semi-acoustic tones. And again, an experiential type of song. And I think lyrical content lends itself to, can you see the other side of this person who maybe is having a difficult time or going through something. So there's always many sides to us. And I think in a relationship, those, come out at different times. And can that other person appreciate that or see that? Todd, what are your thoughts on this song? I really love the chorus, the stuff that you did, the harmonies on the chorus. And I remember in particular, I don't know where I pulled that bridge out of when I jumped to that one chord, but I remember you saying, well, that's pretty cool. I forget what songwriter you made a reference to, but I think this one came out. It's a pretty, when we talk about big hooks with massive vocals and powerful guitars, I think that this one is very emotional and achieves those things. What are your thoughts?
I pick up on that bridge section especially. I remember when I first sent over the demo mix, and this one was probably late 2020 when I first sent over the demo mix to you, that you said you listened to that bridge part over and over again.
Yeah.
Because of how powerful it sounded. And I just took on your vocal demo, you would just have the one line, just like a one line melody. And then I took that and went over it and went below it and just expanded it up. And it winds up being the most emotional part of the song. When the lyric says, "Can you believe in me?" That's my favorite part of the song. It's pretty simple as far as a lot of your songs are concerned. Some of your songs really have a lot of more complicated, kind of interwoven guitar melodies and things going on here. But this is very simple musically, which is part of the reason why it can grow from a ethereal standpoint in terms of the voices and the emotion, because it's over some pretty simple musical ideas. So I think it hits the mark in that sense. I think it's also the longest tune on the album.
I think you're right. Yeah. All right. A lot of fun on that one, though. All right. Let's move to the next one. Next song, Hard to Get. And what I remember about this one is I had this riff kicking around for many years, never recorded it, and had the idea for Hard to Get. And I just remember finally getting it down, starting to record the guitars. And I only ever had the verse. So when I put together the rest of it, the chorus and then also the bridge, I remember I had some rough lyrics for you about the idea here, and I had the chorus kind of right now. I think you altered that a bit. But what I remember distinctly about this was the bridge was absolutely new, and I put this big guitar orchestration in there. It's got all these harmonies going on, and when it came down to writing down some lyrics for that one, I just said, I got nothing, Todd. What do you got? So, Todd, what do you remember about Hard to Get?
Yeah, I remember that spot you're talking about, where that was completely my melody and my lyrics and my then I stacked it up, and that was a really neat spot. So this is one of the ones where I probably had more of a hand in the final sound. Also because of I remember your demo, you had it was almost like an afterthought to you, I think, when you were singing the chorus, and at the end it just said something about being on my knees, and then you said, "I'm begging, please."
All right.
At the end. So what I did was I changed that to "I can't leave it up to fate, set it straight." But then I took the "set it straight" and almost made that be the centerpiece of the chorus, is the final "set it straight" a couple of times, where it's kind of a powerful, maybe 8 or 10 voices coming at you. And to me, that was Def Leppard-ish. And I remember you remarked about that as well, that there's a certain technique Def Leppard would use where they would sing another line that was not the chorus itself or not the name of the song or something like that, and then almost have that be the centerpiece.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try to do with that one. I think that's the coolest part of the song in that sense, is that "set it straight" when it comes in and then it ends right on it.
Yeah,
It's also pretty quick too. The song's pretty fast too. It kind of you get in and get out with that one. You get the ideas, and it's also got something strange in there. I never remotely said change anything, so I just left it the way it was. But you do something that not too many songwriters do. You modulate up and then you modulate back down.
Why not, right?
Yeah. Hey, so that was also something that was part of the chorus, which is kind of unique, is it goes up and then back down again. Usually songs modulate in a linear pattern upward, but this kind of went up and back down again, which gives it its own flair as well.
Absolutely. One of the parts that I remember recording was the last thing I recorded for the album, way late in the process. I felt like something was missing from the verse. And I think something changed from the demo, from the feel in the demo to the final version. So I put together a staccato part. I was messing around one night in the studio, and I feel like that little ditty, as I like to call them, really adds a lot. And I remember flying that over to you, Danny, where you could make it a little bit more punchy. So I just remember that as being one of the last parts I recorded way late in the game. So that's hard to get. Okay. So let's talk about Control next. Todd, what do you remember about Control? I know my story here. What do you remember about that one?
To me, I think looking back at it now, it's almost like a companion piece to The Other Side in some ways, in terms of the feel, but it's a little more musically complicated than The Other Side. I definitely recall on the outro having it be my most Brian Wilson-y type moment. I was doing a lot of Beach Boys type vocals, stacked up and going up high on a lot of it. I thought the feel of it was really good. I tweaked a lot of your lyrics. One of them probably is the most not understood or asked about lyric, completely, where I say helplessness replete. I like the way that worked, because if you're replete with something, it's taken over your whole life. So that dovetails into the last thought, which I will share, is there are several people, which you may speak of too, several people who've told me it's their favorite thing that they've heard, including my brother and even his little 6-year-old boy. My nephew sings, I shot him over a copy of it. Obviously we haven't released this yet, but I shot him over a copy of one thing and said, here, listen to what we're doing. And he says he can't hear enough of the song. He loves the song, but he asked what that one line was and what I was saying there.
People will be ripping out their dictionaries, right?
That's right.
I'll be honest with you, even at my age, I'm like, I don't often hear songs in my mother language that I have to look up a word. I'm like, what did you say? What does that mean?
But I like the feel of it. It's, as you go through the song list, it kind of maybe gets buried in amongst everything else, but as it stands alone, it's been surprisingly well received from the limited amount of people that have had some introduction to the music.
Excellent. Yeah, now that's a song that I never recorded, but I had knocking around for some time, and the lyrics were a little bit different. Idea, though, very much the same. But I remember playing that on acoustic guitar and just writing out those vocals. And I added a couple things near the end there, but especially in the beginning of with those arpeggios. And I remember working with Danny to say those have to be very prominent in the intro and during the choruses. There's some arpeggios that really make it move along, and that's something that I really appreciate in that song. As well as, I think, when the heavy guitars kick in for the chorus, I think, or I should say the bridge portion of it, I really like what Chris Allen, how he attacked that on the drums. So it gives it a lot of punch. So I think that one came out really well, and I've heard a lot of positive feedback on that. It's always an interesting thing, though, right? You have these albums, you write these songs, and you think these are the ones that everyone's going to like, and until it finally you start getting that feedback, sometimes it's surprising for that one to be one that folks would gravitate towards. But to your point, Todd, I've heard a lot of folks, the limited folks that have heard it, really do like that one a lot, and it probably for a number of different reasons, but it is pretty catchy, so I'm happy with that.
And also, now that you mention, I'm picking up on something you said. I think the chorus was one of those acoustic ideas that you had back in '97, '98, right? Because I think there is something batting around when I recorded it back then, just as an instrumental idea, and so I think that is part of that. The basis of that chorus is that one. And what you just said reminds me of something that Elliot Easton from the Cars said in an interview that I always picked up on, which is when you're making a record, you're doing it behind closed doors. It's your own feelings, it's your own privacy, it's your own art. And all of a sudden, at one point, you just hand it off for everyone to just hear and comment on it. And it's your own thing. And it's interesting to see how someone reacts to it after you're so close to it and it's just your own self. And then you just hand it out for the world to hear and start to react to it. That was what Control's been to me. Like, wow, this is the one that several people have said something about.
Yeah.
I was actually just playing it back on because I forgot that I have access to it over here. Just listen to the intro, and I remember now I'm a sucker for those slower mid-tempo grooves. That's just what I relate to the most, and it's just got a great feel to it.
Excellent. Okay, next song is Serpent's Kiss, and this is undoubtedly probably the heaviest and potentially darkest song on the album. And the title kind of implies the subject matter about someone who's a serpent you can't trust, someone that's evil, and your reaction to that kind of thing. I remember this one especially because I used some 7-string on this one, and I feel like that came in pretty heavily. Or sounds heavy. And then also, I think during the breakdown there, it's a very angry piece. And Todd, I think you did a great job with all the harmonies here and interplaying with some of the melody that's going on there. But I love that breakdown piece where you say, where we do, you get the best of me, you got the best of me, not this time. That to me is one of my favorite spots on the album because it's real heavy. And of course, I love that stuff. Any thoughts on that one, Todd?
I just know that a couple of times I sent you over some proposed final versions, and you said, no, you gotta get a little different with how you do the chorus. So you were encouraging that. And as it turns out, I kind of was at a certain point felt like let's have a little Alice Cooper vibe to the way that I'm singing the chorus, especially. There's also a couple of nods to my Enough's Enough fandom in there in one of the parts too. So I think that some of that vocal might not be natural for me, but at the same time it was a nod to some of my influences. And it's quick and fast and in your face.
Yeah, and one of my like I said, darkest tunes on there. Did you change many of the lyrics on that one? I'm not sure that you did.
I didn't really at all. I think that was pretty much your baby there.
And I remember actually, and I'm thinking about this, I was headed to a meeting and I was on an early morning flight and I had my phone out, and that's when I wrote most of those lyrics on a flight. So, hey, maybe not having enough coffee and the subject matter in and of itself added up to a pretty dark song, and but a very impactful one. All right. And so, actually,
speaking of which, Carm, about the guitars, for anyone who's curious when they hear it, what pedal was that you said you were using in the intro?
Oh yeah, that synth sound. That's actually a Boss pedal. I think it's SY1 or something. I can't
you had just gotten there, right?
I just got it. Yeah, it's underneath here. I'm not going to bend down and go.
Yeah, you heard that. There's for all the guitar nerds out there that had no idea that that's actually a guitar there.
Yeah, so that's a synth pedal. It was the new Boss SY something, and I got it from Sweetwater. I waited months to get it, and I thought, let me try this out. So that's the sound that you hear in the beginning, and then also revisited again, I think, during the bridge before the breakdown.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So that one came out nice. I also remember on Serpent's Kiss too, I was pretty insistent on the arpeggios, Danny being up there in the mix, and you did a nice job placing those in there, so it has a little bit more of a complex feel as Todd plays with the vocals.
That's one of the things about mixing sometimes, is because you have your own initial reaction to the piece, and then you're like, oh, you want that louder. I don't even remember that track being there because I was so focused on, X, Y, and Z first.
Right. And then the outro as well. I know Todd wanted to shorten the vocal part at the end, but I said, let's leave it because it's supposed to be like agonizing. It's supposed to be like, someone is like maybe even suffering from the serpent's kiss. and it's kind of painful kind of thing. So the way that it kind of fades away with that, also the synth is there. I like the way it fades off into the distance. So it's kind of cool that way.
Medusa has left the building.
Medusa has left the building, yes. All right, so the last song is Door to Nowhere, and Todd had referenced this earlier. This was a riff that and pretty much all the music that I wrote a long time ago. And I remember saying to Todd, I've got a title for you. And it's called Door to Nowhere. And see what you can do with that. So Todd, I think you wrote pretty much all the lyrics on this one in particular. And, you know, I was going from memory when I recorded it with my Kiesel AE 185, great acoustic electric sounds. But I think I added like an extra line or somewhere here or there. So yeah, I kind of threw you off, right?
Yeah. There were a couple of things that were different from the. I was used to hearing it a certain way, and yeah, that's how I remember it too. There's actually a full version of this from about 1997 when I'm talking about recording those acoustic demos of yours. We actually laid down an entire track where, well, you played one acoustic guitar and then I did 3 or 4 tracks of vocals over it. I did write all the lyrics. And yes, when you reproduced it this time, you added an extra line into every chorus, which I then wrote a new line for. I had to. And I think there was one other spot later on in the song which you did a little differently, but this is the way we hear it now. So this is probably the one that's the most mine, in the sense of that was my melody, my lyrics, that was a leftover from the way we used to write, when you just present me with a guitar track and I take it from there, do the melody, the lyrics, the harmonies, etc. So it basically translated that way. And the other thing was, when we did it before, was just acoustic with no bass or drums on it. So now there's bass and drums in it. There were a couple of spots like I had in Consequence where I had the idea about the drums dropping out, coming back in just for emotional power. And Chris Allen again followed that really, really well and picked up what I was putting down. So it's a nice way to end the album too, I think.
I agree. It's kind of a haunting song, and it has the element of the unknown in there. And, you know, when you referenced, or Danny may have, you know, the vocal style, like the 70s kind of thing, I think that definitely comes through there in that song with those harmonies.
Yeah, it kind of feels like I was just listening to the intro on my headphones, and it's I think I used to refer to it as like CSNY has gone to the dark side or something like that. It's just got that vibe to it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a better artist to reference, but that's just what popped in my head.
Yeah, I think that one is a bit different in the sense that with its origin, but also the vibe on it. And I think Todd's right. It's a great way to end the album. Which I think is kind of like a journey. It's kind of like an emotional journey. It's cathartic in some regards. You know, there's some ups, but mostly the songs are about some real issues that folks encounter and can probably all identify with. So I had a lot of fun working on this album, and it was the culmination of, again, it started in 2019. It's 2022 now. And
we stuck it out though, and I'm glad we did.
Stuck it out, yeah. A couple ups and downs along the way, a couple restarts, but I mean, for not having recorded together, Todd, in a long time, I think we hit the nail on the head in terms of, you know, defining what our sound is, and maybe even for the future too. I hope that folks like this and it's well received, because I know I had a lot of fun doing it. Any thoughts, Todd, on that?
Yeah, just to pick up on the end of Door to Nowhere, and therefore the end of the whole album, it's fitting that it just ends on a nice little ringing E minor chord, which is the simplest chord, the simplest rock chord, the simplest thing ever. And in so many of our songs back in the early days were just based around E minor chord. And it's nice to just have it just ends on a nice ringing E minor chord. But yeah, I agree. It's if someone really does take the time to listen to what's going on in a complex way, then the album really is kind of a journey in that sense. A few different types of sounds and different emotions going on. And it was definitely fun to be able to, I guess the way that I'll put it is I think, I didn't realize it till now, you and I both work in the same way. And it used to be that way back when, in the 80s and 90s too. you do a take of a solo and I thought it was good, but you're like, no, I want to do it again. And that was back in the day when you had to record over it, right? You had to record over the old one.
Yeah.
So once you did that, it was shot. Like you couldn't go back to and take it now like you can digitally and just say, no, I'll keep that one from before. So we would be down there, and actually, if you remember, the record button on that little multi-track actually broke. Yeah, it broke because of all the takes that you'd be like, nah, I got to do that again, and I'm kind of the same way, and that's why when we were in the studio, we always kind of felt so rushed because I'd sing a part, I realized I missed that one note right there. Well, then they'd have to wind the tape back, and where do you want to go? Where are you punching in? Now it's great. You just click the mouse, you kind of just yell, oh, expletive, and go back and do it again. And you work that way and I work that way. So I think by the time we turned over the music to Danny, there was probably very little that had to be done in terms of cleaning it up, because you and I both probably turned over essentially immaculate product in that sense.
Yeah. Well, let's transition into that. Danny, once you had everything in your hands here, any thoughts on mixing the whole project? I know that we had Todd and I, had some very definite ideas about what we wanted to hear. And I know that there was some back and forth on that until we got like the perfect, you really were able to capture the vibe, at least on the vocals, I think, right? What Todd was aiming for with that huge sound. Any thoughts on when you got it, when you were starting to mix it, and the process that we went through? Because I know we're pretty exacting and you did a great job. I'm thinking we probably drove you a little bit crazy.
Well, it's crazy, like in a good, healthy, balanced way, if you will, if that exists. Basically, and I was used to this, thankfully, from working with you on your solo stuff, like the shred stuff. Because I remember, if I can go back a couple years for 30 seconds, I was very kind of hesitant at first when you wanted to work with me because of my background with quote unquote clients and stuff, and I'm like, oh man, this guy's recorded to like loops or something, and like to a click, he says, what am I in for here? And that's when I was like, get your tracks, and I'm like, oh my god. First of all, he gave me the tempo, which no one ever bothers to do. Secondly, he's actually on the grid and he can play to a click, which is unheard of in the rock community, at least around here, or people that I've interacted with. So to that order, it made things dead easy to start programming drums and bass to, because you're perfectly in time. I mean, I think I've made maybe like 2 guitar edits in like 5 albums worth of material. So, to give you a little bit of a ratio there. And then Todd was basically the same thing from the vocal perspective. Like, wow, this guy's like dead on. I mean, he's human and working really fast. So there are times where, a vocal might be like a little off in one track in like as far as like the chord context. So, and it's now 2022, and it's very commonplace to tune people and edit regardless of how good they are. I mean, there's country stars that own the charts that they go through editing before it goes to mix. It's just what you do. Thankfully, we have tools like Melodyne Studio and that, which saves time, because with that I can actually tune an entire vocal stack basically simultaneously. But I do want people to know that Todd, like, I mean, when I'm talking about editing vocals here, we're talking like maybe like 5%, something like that, and I'm generalizing over the course of a record. So it came together extremely fast in that regard. And obviously you have people like Hawkins and Allen with their tracks. I mean, the same thing. I mean, I think I've done across the board less than a handful of edits in like 5 albums worth of material from them. So it's definitely it makes for a more pleasant experience, because you can jump right into the mix without having to go through and doctor everything for hours and hours.
Yeah, and for anyone watching this, I just have to give Danny a plug, because I've worked with him on many albums, and his attention to detail and commitment, his dedication. I think a lot of folks would have probably, I'm making a generalization here, maybe not being fair to other folks that I don't know, but he never gives up, and he always delivers even beyond my expectations. So, credit to you, Danny. I think a big piece of the sound here with you at the helm, I think really helped us achieve a big sounding album, which is exactly what we wanted, and kind of set forth potentially opportunity for the future. Now that we kind of know, hey, this is the kind of this is the Grasso Sardella sound, right?
Totally.
So love that. Album was mastered by Andy Van Dett, who has mastered all my albums. I'm very fortunate. I think we're very fortunate. He's
love Andy.
Yeah. So I feel, he's worked with everyone from Russian Porcupine Tree to Dream Theater and every band in between. So I feel fortunate to have him master this album as well. And as usual, outstanding work from Andy. And hopefully we'll continue to do more so in the future.
Yeah, he's definitely a legend for a reason. I don't know if you've met him face to face, but I've met him a handful of times, and he's just a teddy bear to hang out with, and he's very welcoming and just super funny, and just his track record speaks for itself. He's done Deep Purple, Heavy Devies, they call him Devin Townsend, and I think he actually did a Dream Theater 5-1 live album at some point. So he definitely knows his stuff, and I can't recommend him enough especially for this style of music.
Absolutely, and he is a pleasure to work with. I've said to him in the past, like, hey, you do this every day, so I'm going to defer to you in some cases, right? But he's also very patient. I remember back in, I think it was 2010, I did my first solo album. I was like, Andy, I've never done this before, so help me out here. And he was very patient with me, so very cool guy to work with. Now, I'll fast forward in terms of doing promo. We've worked with Rick Scheel on photos. I think that was back, I can't remember when that was. I think that was, let me see here. That was in July that we did that photo shoot over at JGI Media Albany. And then also we're working on wrapping up a video for the single Undertow that is done by Rick, as well as John Responte, who owns JGI Media. Todd, any comments on the photo shoot or the video? Those were first for me. The photo shoot not so much, but the video definitely, and that was quite an experience. I hope people are going to like it. What do you remember from that shoot?
Yeah, the photo shoot was actually June.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yep,
You're better with dates than me.
I have some association with that, just remembering what was going on at the time. I thought it went very well. Got to put makeup on for the first time.
Yes, that's right.
Yep. And Rick does a very thorough job. Then we went back to do the video shoot in late August. We did our parts, and it went very well as well. And I know he's got a couple of actors that have gotten into the act, so to speak, and it's a really, at least the drafts that I've seen of the video, it's a really cohesive, nice statement that really looks good and will be a great piece of promotional material.
Yeah, absolutely. And our part was done early on, and credit to Rick for his tenacity in getting that casting put together. Those things fell through a couple times, some of the people that were involved in it, and he was able to pull together some casting that they did a wonderful job with it. So stay tuned for that video and maybe more in the future, hopefully.
Those guys are tremendous talents with cameras, both still and video, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a top-notch facility too. I felt great to be a part of it. And I know one of the things that Rick mentioned as well is that, there's, in that studio, because they have a couple different studio rooms as well, there's a lot of rap artists and so forth. So I think they found it refreshing. Not that there's anything wrong with rap. They found it refreshing to work with a rock type of artist who, does our kind of thing, and we appreciated them as well. So good stuff.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so let's wrap this up. We're working on that album release. Hopefully will be soon. Video release. Be looking online for our updates as those things come out, and maybe some parts of this video just to keep folks, keep things warm and keep folks interested in the project. In terms of the future, we'll see how it goes, right? We'll see. Hopefully folks like this album. I know that we do. Again, I've heard some positive feedback, and hopefully we'll get to explore a little bit more. Todd, any final thoughts as we wrap up this interview here on the Grasso Sardella project, and just general things on your mind as we wrap up?
It's just been fun to revisit that collaboration and see that it's basically what it was even 30 plus years ago, but just with a certain amount of maturation and advances in technology. So that's been a lot of fun from my perspective to be able to put this kind of stuff together. So I'll look forward to doing more of it if any of it is well received, as I'm hoping and anticipating it will be.
Very awesome. All right. Danny, any final thoughts?
I'm just really proud of the product and to work with you guys on it. And I feel like it's different enough to get attention, but it's also familiar enough to also get attention as far as, the arrangements and that sort of thing, the musicality of it. Like we said before, we keep referencing like 70s and 80s, pop rock and that sort of stuff, but it definitely has like its own vibe. And I haven't personally heard anything, and I listen to a lot of music, obviously, like the rock and metal genres, and I haven't heard anything that's even what I would consider comparable to the material. And I don't mean like it's necessarily like, better than anything else in its class, but it's different enough to, I just think it just stands on its own.
Excellent.
Which I think is even better than, being better, so to speak.
Oh, sure. And what I'll say just in conclusion is it's been a pleasure working together with both of you on this and to do a proper album in a sense, and I feel really good about it, not only the way that it came out, but where it came from. It's just very natural of a flow. There's nothing contrived on there. There's nothing that we, tried to make sound like something else. This is who we are, and this is what we came out with. And I think while we did have some ideas about what we wanted, it's a very natural kind of thing. And I think it's the genuine article in that regard from where we're coming from musically. Thanks, everyone.